Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. A lot going on here in the second week of April. My partner, Paul Burmeister, and I are going to dissect all the events in the NFL. And later on in the podcast, you're going to hear some snippets of my conversation with Mike Krzyzewski, the retired Duke basketball coach. We spoke about Bill Belichick last week. Belichick entering the week where he will turn 70. So I wrote a little bit about that in Football Morning in America this week. So Paul Burmeister and I will discuss the tragic death of Dwayne Haskins. We will discuss Belichick turning 70, how it is that I got Coach K to talk about it. We're going to talk about the few things I'm hearing about the draft. The basically all over the map rankings and thoughts about the quarterbacks, when they'll be picked, how many are going to go high. And I also want to talk about why I think this is going to be a very active draft for trades. So we'll get into those, then we'll hear from Mike Krzyzewski. Paul Burmeister, hello. How's life going?
Life is pretty good, Peter. I'm excited to see the range you're flexing with your interview guests to not only get Mike Krzyzewski, that's always a pretty good get, but days after he hung it up and was like the media darling for everyone, and he spent time with you talking about an NFL coach. So I'm excited to talk to you, but also to listen to that a little bit.
You know, let's just start there. For those who might have read Football Morning in America this week, you saw Mike Krzyzewski talk about Bill Belichick. He doesn't know Belichick well, but he's talked to him a few times. He's had him on his podcast/radio show in North Carolina. And I thought the most interesting thing he told me when we spoke last Thursday is that, and I'll just read you this quote that I like. Watching him, it's incredibly interesting. When somebody says, hey, you've been doing this the same way, it's the same job. No, it's not the same job. I'm adapting, and that's exciting. Like, I'm 75. That happened with USA basketball later in my life, and I wanted to use what I learned. And that's what I see in Bill from afar. And he talked about the culture that Belichick has built in New England. And he said, and I quote, culture should not be assumed. It needs miracle grow every year. He's been able to keep that culture going. The interesting thing, Paul, was that when I said to him, hey, you built a pretty good culture yourself, you could hear it in his voice. It was almost like, I would call it a respectful scoffing. And he said, hey, that's college sports. Pro football's different, big business. And he said, I know there can be a lot of selfishness. So it was cool. But as to how this happened, I'm thinking maybe 5 years ago, I got a call from someone who said, hey, I produced the Mike Krzyzewski podcast. And Mike would like to have you on as a guest to talk about the NFL playoffs. And I said, oh my gosh, I'd love to do it. So I did it, and then I did it again one other time. And what was so interesting is that both times I got handwritten notes from Mike Krzyzewski like 4 days later, thanking me, saying, hey, I really respect all your knowledge about football. I'm a big football fan. And I kept the notes. They're here somewhere in my office. I just don't know where. But he's just really into pro football. So I thought I would have a real difficult time getting him. And it wasn't easy per se, but his SID at Duke, John Jackson, sort of carried my message to Mike and waited a few days. Wasn't positive I would get him, but my phone rang last Thursday and said, hey, Peter, it's Mike Krzyzewski. I hear you wanted to talk about Bill Belichick. What I think is really interesting, and this I started thinking about more after the fact, is how you could argue that in America, there's a very small list, okay, of the great coaches of our lifetime. Okay. But the top 5 absolutely unequivocally would have to include Bill Belichick and Mike Krzyzewski. So I was thinking, well, what do these guys have in common? The service academies. Belichick was raised in Annapolis. His dad coached at Navy. He worships Navy, loves the discipline, loves the order in sort of the military life. And obviously, Mike Krzyzewski went to Army, was a cadet, speaks reverentially of his time at West Point. So that, to me, is kind of an interesting commonality, the organization and the fact that, look, I just think that when I think of those two guys, there's kind of different personalities. Belichick is kind of dour. Krzyzewski is kind of an open book kind of guy. At least that's my experience with him. But it was interesting to catch up with him and to listen to him about Belichick.
I think it's really fun when you hear someone who you know is one of the best of the all-time best in his or her profession kind of look across the universe a little bit and see somebody else who is also a super high achiever and talk about him or her and what they most admire. And I liked what Mike said to you about Bill in your article. And he said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, Peter, but he pointed out that he really admired that Bill Belichick is a super curious person. It's not about what he knows now, and it's about what he's going to learn later. I was hosting on the sideline at a Premier Lacrosse League game, I think about 2 or 3 years ago in Foxborough, and Bill was there. He loves lacrosse. So he was there, did an interview with him, and game starts. I kind of glance over my shoulder down near about the 10-yard line, and Bill's still there. Bill's on the sideline watching with 2 of the better players in the league who were really good high school football players. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Matt and Tom are getting some time with Bill. I glance down in the second quarter. They're still there talking. So I get with the PLL players after the game. I'm like, what were you guys keeping Bill so long for? Like, what were you asking him? They're like, we didn't ask him anything. He was asking us about how we defend certain packages down near the goal and what we do up top when there's 3 people there and we only have 2. He was going to school on what they knew, different sport, but about defending and scheming. And I'm like, man, here's somebody with all these Super Bowl wins, best of all time, and it's May, and he's got 2 lacrosse players. He can't get enough about scheme and defense and how you think about being outnumbered and how you deal with that. To that word curiosity, lifelong curiosity about getting better. I think anybody who's been around Bill has some kind of example like that.
You know, Paul, this is the story. I stole it from Chris Sims. I give Chris credit all the time, but you know, Chris was on the Patriots coaching staff for a year as just kind of like what you call in college, grad assistant, breaking down tape, servicing the offensive coaches. And at the time, I think he thought he might really want to do that. But he ended up working there for a year. And he told me a story about how on kind of the weekend of Mother's Day, Belichick was in the office and they had a staff meeting, whatever, Friday or Saturday. And Belichick was just totally unaware that it was Mother's Day weekend. And once he found out, he said, oh, okay, you guys go ahead, don't, whatever, be with your wives, whatever. But Sims's point was so interesting. He goes, a day in May to Bill Belichick is as important for building his team as a day in October. And a game day has no more importance in his brain than putting together the schedule for training camp or doing all the things you do to set up what you're doing, long term for your team. And he said that is why, to me, nothing ever kind of gets Bill too frazzled during a game, because he treats every day the same. Every day has sort of equal importance. And I found that really interesting because don't you go back to thinking about Belichick and you're thinking about the Seattle Super Bowl where really, and you know it so well, that as the clock is winding down in the last minute and Bill is not calling a timeout, don't you just think to yourself, what in the world are you doing? And Belichick is just on the sidelines, just standing there as the clock goes down. Because remember the situation. If Seattle scores right there, scores a touchdown and goes ahead, and Belichick has let the clock run down, they're going to have like 20 seconds left, for Brady maybe to make 2 desperation throws and try to get, the game either into overtime. I forget what the score was. But Belichick basically said, I'm not nervous. I know exactly what I'm doing. And what he was doing is he was putting all the pressure on Seattle, and he was doing it in a very, very calm way so that everybody on his sidelines would also be calm. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of he treats every day the same, because he knows that if he has made a decision, there's no sense getting all jittery, nervous, getting, your stomach tied in knots over it. This is the decision we made, and so let's move on.
I don't know if there's someone who knows him better in the NFL in the last 15, 20 years than Josh McDaniels. And you had Josh quoted in your article this morning as well here as we speak on Monday afternoon. Josh saying that he loves every facet of the calendar. I mean, he's as excited in May, like you pointed out, as he is in November. And, that little story there, just one more example of that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's that story. Listen, I haven't really at any point in this podcast really dissected the draft. And I thought that we'd spend like the last 2 weeks right before the draft really going into here's what I'm hearing. Because, Paul, I'm going to tell you, for people who would say, hey, what are you hearing about the draft? What's going on? I'll give you a great comment from one general manager over the weekend and one agent over the weekend. Okay. The agent said to me, he said, listen, talk to me in 2 weeks, because I never get started sort of reaching into people who I know well in the front office. I never get started until right before the draft, maybe like 3 or 4 days before the draft. Because what happens is so many of these teams are these days sworn to secrecy, can't discuss anything about their plans with anybody from the outside. And the general managers, if you help them, give them information, they might parcel out a couple of things. But mostly, he said, nobody's going to really tell you very much right now, other than theoretical things. Hey, how many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round or whatever. And I thought that was interesting. The general manager said to me, he said, Peter, he said, I might have some exploratory discussions with some teams. And I want to get into a little bit of what I found out secondarily about the Eagles-Saints trade, even though we did talk about that a bit last week. But as he said to me, he goes, nobody's going to really show their hand until the last few days before the draft. And there's one other general manager who I know very well, who was telling me that, like, he really wants a couple of extra 3s and 4s. He said, our board is very, very heavy, stacked with players who we like a lot in the 3rd and 4th round. And he goes, so I'm looking around, I'm asking teams, I'm telling them, hey, we're interested in moving down, in the 1st and 2nd round. So if you are, let's talk. And he said, I don't have any leads right now that I feel real confident about. So I wanted to preface everything we say about the draft and say that. But Paul, there's one thing about the Saints-Eagles trade that I found to be very interesting. So I talked to Mickey Loomis about this, the general manager of the Saints, and he was very clear with this, that Howie Roseman, the GM of the Eagles, called him and said, basically point blank, we are interested in trying to get a one next year, and we'll use one of our ones this year in a package to get it. And what I think is interesting is, Paul, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in reading about this trade, so many people are saying that the Saints got fleeced. They gave up way too much, and they really did give up a lot. They basically gave up a 1, a 2, and a 3, to get an extra 1. And that's a lot. But the reason why I understand exactly why the Saints did it, and why I don't have a problem with why the Saints did it and what they did, is very, very simple. We don't know right now on their board who they have ranked, and because the one thing that Mickey Loomis told me, he said, now we feel like we've got a very good chance of getting 3 of our top 20 or 25 players, and every one of those guys can play a role for us this year. So the Saints are close. They're not handing the NFC South to Tampa at all. They're close, and they can play Tampa very, very well. So I actually think, and let's see what happens, but I actually think, because the Saints are a very good drafting team, they have a defense that's built to win now. We'll see what happens and who they pick. And again, it's hard to make judgments on it right now, but I don't hate this trade for New Orleans at all. Getting another first-round pick in a year that they need help kind of all over their roster. They need a receiver. They need a tackle. They need help in the secondary. I don't hate this trade for them at all.
I don't at all either. And I think in the abstract, for any team sitting down where they are, lower part of that first round, teens, 20s, you also have to keep this in mind with this particular draft. I'm one of these people that thinks that there will be more quarterbacks that go in the first round, that a lot of people say, oh, maybe 1 or 2. I can see 3 or 4. And we all know this isn't a great class of quarterbacks. So there could be a team like the Saints. They might not have a quarterback in their top 25 in terms of best players overall. If 3 go, just makes their picks in the first round all the better, because their value gets all the more, because players that weren't rated in their top 25, I think a lot of teams don't have these quarterbacks rated that high, they're going to go. So your chances of getting terrific value for what you need at that spot in the draft go up even more, because these quarterbacks are going to be overdrafted.
So let's get into that for a second. In talking to people around the league, I got 3 very interesting opinions. 2 people in the league, one from Chris Sims, who Chris has a very interesting way of doing the draft. People in the NFL really trust his opinion of quarterbacks, because he's been right about so many of them, in the last few drafts. So I think he has the ability to dip into some NFL front offices and coaching staffs to find out exactly what teams are thinking. So, he told me that, he thought there'd only be maybe 2 quarterbacks picked in the first round. Greg Cosell, universally respected tape head and draft analyst, and from ESPN and NFL Films, he said, I think there will be 5. He made a great point to me that every year there seems to be 2 drafts. There's the draft of the regular draft, and then there's the quarterback draft, because quarterbacks always get pushed up higher because of the desperation to actually find one. But here's the other thing. A team that I think is going to pick a quarterback in the first or second round told me, and they've been studying, looking at what teams have visits with what players. And this is a team that will have multiple quarterbacks into their facility before the draft. And this official of this team told me that I think there will be 3 picked in the top 20, and they will be Pickett, Willis, and Desmond Ridder. So Kenny Pickett, the quarterback from Pitt, famous for the small hands. Malik Willis, the quarterback from Liberty, who most people think could really use a good NFL redshirt year. And then Desmond Ridder, who's got tremendous experience, started most of 4 years at Cincinnati, has been very popular on the team visiting circuit because he's played a lot of pro-style concepts at Cincinnati and can really talk the language of NFL coaches. Paul, I want to give you just an open mic right now. You tell me, of those 3 guys, who do you feel strongly about, positive or negative, and give me a little bit of analysis on them.
Okay, so we're talking Pickett, Willis, and Ridder.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 guys. Okay, I think you start with the safest guy, who I'm not necessarily going to say is my favorite guy, but Kenny Pickett starts in the 40s, got a little bit better or a lot better every single season. Nice arm, but not an awesome arm. Good kid, smart kid. That's probably because of the combination of everything. People see him as the safest one. So he goes somewhere in the first round, whether he should or shouldn't. I mean, that's a guarantee that Kenny Pickett goes somewhere in the first. I like Malik Willis better. As we've talked about the last couple of weeks, I like to make the distinction between strong arm and talented deep ball thrower. And if you go back and watch him, every kind of deep ball you can think of, now maybe it's not against great competition, but he's got the whole thing. He can throw it a long way accurately with nice touch. He can drive it in there. It's all there in terms of the downfield passing. And he also has a lot more to add to the run game than Kenny Pickett. So if I'm in the top 10, if I'm Carolina, and I think that that's a team that will do it at 6, I like Willis more than I like Kenny Pickett. Desmond Ridder is the really interesting one because people are all over the board on him. Chris Sims, who you mentioned, I talked to Chris about the quarterbacks, at least once a week, likes him but doesn't love him. I saw Desmond play in person this year against Notre Dame. He made a couple of terrific throws when it mattered a whole lot. So I think he's someone who also could go, once we get past 20, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that combination of experience, throwing the ball, and what he can do in the running game, if he goes somewhere after 20. So I think all 3 of those guys go in the first round, and I'll throw in one more, pick another quarterback. I think one more, probably Matt Corral, will also make it 4 to go in round 1.
Chris had a great comment to me about Corral, and I think this is really smart. He goes, because it's clear, the Lions have the 32nd pick, the last pick of the first round, and then they have the 34th pick, the second pick of the second round. And I didn't write about this, but I always think that if you look at, and his point is the Lions should just take Corral, stash him on the roster, make him, work with Jared Goff. Jared Goff will know, hey, there's somebody I've got to look over my shoulder at, and so, and just in case, because they're not positive about Goff. And I think that's really smart. But this is one thing, Paul, that always sticks with me about the format of the NFL draft. And for everybody who is kind of a draft Nick. So the draft this year, round 1 is on Thursday, April 28th. Rounds 2 and 3 are on Friday, April 29th. And the first pick or 2, maybe even the third pick of round 2 always have great value in the, say, 18 hours between the end of the first round and the start of the second round. Now, why is that? It's because there are so many teams that have their eye on trying maybe to get back up into late in the first round so that they can get their 5th year out of a first round pick. You know, for those who don't know, basically the picks in the first round, teams can use 5 years on them. You know, their contract can run for 5 years, and they're basically tied to their team for 5 years. In the second round, that becomes 4 years. So a lot of people like to get 28, 29, 30 right in there, but not everybody can do that. You still really want the player, even if you only have him tied to you for 4 years. So the phone, I can tell you, with Jacksonville, with Detroit, I think Houston has the 3rd pick, you know, of the second round. Those teams will hear from a lot of people in, say, the 2 hours after round 1 ends, and then maybe starting at 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday. There will be a lot of chatter with teams trying to move up. I only say that because that is where sometimes, if you are a team like Detroit, and let's say a team says, hey, we'll give you our 1 next year for the 34th pick in the draft. And then you really have to start thinking about it. If you're Detroit and you're trading the 34th pick and you're trading to a team that you project is going to be a 500 team, you know, you say, wow, would we trade the 34th pick this year for the pick we project to be 16, 18, 14 next year, when the draft is supposed to be a little bit better than it is this year? Those are the kind of decisions teams have to make as you sort of get late in the draft. Anyway, I just wanted to tell that story because you always hear on them during the day of the second day, you always hear people talking about that and saying, yeah, we talked to a lot of teams this morning, couldn't make a deal, or we wanted, let's say Desmond Ridder, let's say Matt Corral. Anyway, I think that Corral, that's right about his area right then. Paul, I want to ask you a little bit now about something that I really think is going to be interesting going into the draft. And that is, I called it in my column, trade mania. And what I mean by that is, I mean that there are teams right now that when I look at picks 7 through 22, I see general managers who are almost always aggressive. Now, I added Joe Schoen to this. Joe Schoen, the rookie GM of the Giants, because I really believe he wants to turn one of those picks at 5 and 7 into a 1 next year and something else this year. Then you got John Schneider of the Seahawks at 9, Nick Caserio of Houston at 13, Eric DeCosta of the Ravens at 14, Howie Roseman, who's got 15 and 18 in Philadelphia. The Saints, who now have 16 and 19, they love trading. The Chargers, Tom Telesco at 17, and then Brian Gutekunst at 22. And look, there's other general managers in there that if they want to trade, they're not going to be shy. But I look at this now and say, hey, 17 picks in the top 50 have already been traded. I will not be surprised if by the middle of the second round, between now and that Friday, we see at least 10 more trades involving those first 50 picks in the draft.
And I think what's going to accelerate that even more, Peter, people who really, really know the personnel of this draft will point out that the second round, the third round, that's really the sweet spot of where this draft is. So not only is there this mindset, this aggressiveness, this open-minded feeling about draft picks, it's okay to trade your high draft picks. Teams are going to want to be in the second and third round. And teams also wanted to be on the other end of this trade, not so much for a player and not even just to be in the game of a better quarterback draft next year, I think teams want to load up for the big player trades next year as well, to have that extra first, to have that extra second, not just for quarterback, but to go after the skill position player that you really want, like we've seen in this offseason.
The one other thing to think about, Paul, is that because so many teams have different boards this year and are thinking differently about this draft this year, you know, and look, a lot of times players get rated a lot different by different teams, but especially this year when there are so many players in, say, picks 50 through 130 who are really, really hot and popular. So I just think we've got a chance, with so many people viewing this draft differently, we've just got a chance to see a lot of fun things happen. So Paul, I wanted to close this part of the podcast talking a little bit about Dwayne Haskins. Everybody knows now that the former Ohio State quarterback, 24 years old, died very tragically on Saturday morning when he was struck by a vehicle on a highway near Fort Lauderdale. And look, we'll find out a lot more about the details and all that. But I'll tell you what struck me and I don't know Dwayne Haskins. All right. I don't know him. I never had a conversation with him. So I can't sit here and say, oh my God, what a great guy, because I don't have any direct knowledge of that. But I really feel like he was a great guy. And the sadness of this is, I mean, just look at the tweet that his Pittsburgh wide receiver teammate Chase Claypool sent out, with just bawling like a child, because that's how much he was. That's how friendly he was and how much he thought of Dwayne Haskins. And look, there's been a lot said about, you know, criticisms for Gil Brandt and Adam Schefter for bringing in, you know, other parts of Haskins' life and how he has not become a great player and all that stuff. But I would just tell you this: of all the teams in the NFL to pick up a player and to stick with that player now into a second year, the Pittsburgh Steelers don't do charity cases. And, you know, the Pittsburgh Steelers believed sincerely that Dwayne Haskins had a chance after being drafted by Washington and then being cut in his second year by Washington. They thought that they were going to be the beneficiary of a second chance to Dwayne Haskins. And people who had been around him in the last year, and plus the people who'd been working out with him in Florida, talked about, you know, how hard he was working and just what a happy, free spirit he was. And that's the one thing that I just hope that people take with them about Dwayne Haskins, that he was a very good person. He's wonderful inside his family, to his sister. He's very close to his sister. And I just hope that people can take a little bit of that in their heart and take that part of Dwayne Haskins and make the world just a little bit of a better place.
You bring up so many thoughts that trigger other thoughts for me, Peter. Number one, what you said about the fact that you didn't know him. And I not only didn't know him either, Peter, I was never around him. And sometimes this business can fool you into thinking you feel like you know somebody, even when you don't, just because you've been around them. Well, I never met him and was never around him. But I think a tragic moment like this for guys who do what we do, it really forces you to think about this person, not this player, but this person in a way that we never really did. I mean, when I thought about Dwayne Haskins in the past, it was, okay, how high of a first-round pick should he be based off what he did at Ohio State? What's happening in Washington? What kind of competition can he give to Mitch Trubisky? Maybe he's a better quarterback than Mitch Trubisky. You think about all these things only in the sense of a football player and prospect and what he might do. And now this tragic event is right there for all of us. And all of a sudden you think of it, you think of this player as a person. And I can't help but just think of him as a dad or as a sibling. Like I think about it now, it's like, oh my gosh, this person who all I've ever done is think about him as a quarterback is gone. That's somebody's son. That's somebody's sibling. That's a number of people's best friend. It's a number of teammates who fell in love with him. Now that person's gone for him. And it just shakes you. And there are certain things that come up and that force you to think about them differently, or think about a person you never met in a different way. And it's unfortunate that it's tragic, but it does make you think of all these things as a dad, as a friend, as a sibling. And it's just, I don't have something to share that's insightful based off of personal experience, just that it's made me think and feel a lot like a lot of people who've thought about Dwayne in other ways, to really consider him much more as like I do with everything now, as a dad.
As Ben Roethlisberger said on social media over the weekend, he was a young man that didn't ever seem to have a bad day.
What a quality. I mean, think about that. Like, we're around people like that, Peter, who are always positive, and think about what it adds to your day.
Yeah. Anyway, rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins, and really our best to his wife and his family, and may you all find some peace in knowing, honestly, that he was such a beloved figure by his friends inside and outside football. Paul, that's going to do it for this portion of the podcast. We're going to get into my conversation. I'm going to play you part of my conversation with Mike Krzyzewski, the retired Duke basketball coach, who is, as you will hear, a pretty big Bill Belichick fan also. My thanks to Mike Krzyzewski for his time and his wisdom, and also to Paul Burmeister, my friend and partner at NBC, for the work he does this week and every week with the podcast. We'll be back next week with another one. Next week, we will be 1 week away from what has become maybe the biggest non-game event on the sports calendar every year in the United States. We'll be 1 week away from the NFL draft. Come back next week. I promise I'm going to have some good rumors and some things that might happen and that I'm hearing, and we'll try to spice up your pre-draft listening a little bit. And then the following week, we will discuss my mock draft. Paul and I will talk for way too long about things that may or may not happen. But anyway, thanks a lot for listening this week. And we look forward to hearing from you during the course of the week. Comments on the pod, anything you'd like to hear, guests you might want to hear. Feel free to send them my way at peterkingfmia@gmail.com. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a great week, everybody.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.